Black Spruce Lake, a small spring-fed lake in the Superior National Forest of northeastern Minnesota, freezes solid every year between approximately the 15th and 25th of November. The freeze begins in the small, careful pattern that all northern lakes freeze in. A thin sheet of ice forms across the shallow bays first, then spreads outward toward the deeper main basin, then thickens day by day through the small, cold, steady cycle of late autumn nights below freezing and afternoons just above. By the second week of December in a normal year, the ice on Black Spruce Lake is 14 inches thick. By mid-January, it is 24 inches. By the deepest cold of late February, it is, in some places, 36 inches. Substantial enough that, by the practical knowledge of any northern Minnesotan who has ever driven on a frozen lake, a half-ton truck can park on it without any concern at all. The thaw begins in the first warm days of April. The thaw works backward through the same sequence, in reverse. The deep water in the center of the basin opening first, the small bays last. Ice out, by the careful records of the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, occurs on Black Spruce Lake, on average, on the 17th of April, give or take 5 days in either direction, depending on the year. For approximately 150 days every year, between mid-November and mid-April, the lake is not a body of water in any meaningful defensive sense. The lake is a flat, walkable, drivable surface. The lake is a corridor. For the other 215 days, the lake is the small, careful, natural barrier that islands and lakes have always been. Halvor's Island sits in the middle of the western basin of Black Spruce Lake, approximately 250 yards from the nearest mainland point. The island is approximately 2 acres in size, 800 feet long, 200 feet wide at its widest, and rises approximately 20 feet above the summer water line at its central knob. The island is named for my maternal great-grandfather, Halvor Lindgaard, who came to the Iron Range from the small village of Bergen, Norway, in 1905, who worked 23 years in the iron mines at Sudan, and who bought the island and the small 4-acre mainland lot adjacent to it in 1923 with the careful savings of a man who had decided that, in his retirement, he wanted a small piece of the new country that nobody could take away from him. Halvor's family has owned the island for 103 years. I have been the family member quietly using the island as a primary retreat for the last 12. I have been completely alone on it since the morning of the 21st of October, 2025. My name is Astrid Lind. I am 58 years old. I had been, until my retirement in the spring of 2024, a high school art teacher at Duluth East High School in Duluth, Minnesota, for 31 years. This is how the small 2-acre family island that my great-grandfather bought from a Mesabi Range timber broker in 1923 became, in the world that has come, the place I have been quietly living in for the last 199 days, the place I have been completely invisible to the world from for that entire time, and the place I have learned, over the course of one full Minnesota winter, what the small, careful difference between a defensible position and an undefensible position really means. I want to tell you about the cabin, because the cabin is the thing that has, in nearly 7 months, made every other detail of this account possible. The cabin was built between 1926 and 1928 by Halvor Lindgaard, with the help of his 3 sons, my grandfather Magnus and his brothers Lars and Knut, and a small set of Iron Range neighbors who had come up to help on small, careful weekend work parties. The cabin is a single-story log structure, 24 feet by 32 feet, with 4 rooms, a main living room with a substantial fieldstone fireplace, a small kitchen, a small bedroom, and a small enclosed porch on the south side that faces the water. The cabin is built of hand-hewn white pine logs that Halvor cut from a small set of trees on the mainland portion of the property, and rafted across the lake on the small, careful spring of 1926. The roof is corrugated metal that the family installed in 1958 to replace the original cedar shakes. The chimney is the original 1928 fieldstone, which my grandfather rebuilt in 1979 after a bad winter had damaged the upper courses. The cabin has a small woodshed about 20 feet east of the back door. which I had been keeping topped off with 2 cords of split white birch and aspen for the last 10 years. The cabin has a small composting toilet about 30 feet up the small path behind the building. The cabin has a small dock and a small boathouse at the south end of the island, where the family has been keeping a single battered 14-foot aluminum boat with a 9.9 horsepower Mercury outboard motor and an old wooden fishing canoe that my father built in 1964. The cabin does not have a well. The cabin has, by the small, careful inheritance of every island cabin on every northern Minnesota lake, a small system for getting water out of the lake, a small hand pump that draws lake water through a sand filter into a kitchen tap, plus a small rainwater catchment off the metal roof that gives me, in the average summer rainfall pattern of northern Minnesota, about 25 gallons per inch of rain into a 500-gallon poly tank by the back wall. The cabin has a small, efficient wood stove that my father installed in 1991 in the kitchen, in addition to the original 1928 fireplace. The cabin has on its bookshelves the substantial library of 3 generations of Lindas who have used the place. My grandfather's books, my parents' books, my own books, plus the small, careful set of paintings I have made on the island over the last 12 years. The cabin is, by every measure that matters to me, the place in the world that I have most loved. I had been at the cabin since the 28th of September, 2025, on a 6-week solo painting residency that I had been planning for months. My husband Henrik Lind, 60 years old, retired civil engineer, my partner of 32 years, had stayed in Duluth because he had been finishing a small consulting project for a former client and had been planning to drive up to the island for the weekend of the 24th of October. He had not, on the morning of the 21st, made it to the island. The first sign that anything was wrong was the small, portable shortwave radio I keep on the cabin's mantle, which had been broadcasting nothing but the emergency alert system tone on every commercial frequency by 6:15 a.m. on the morning of the 21st. I want to skip past the next 2 hours, because the next 2 hours were the same 2 hours that, by every reasonable inference, the entire upper Midwest was experiencing simultaneously. I will say only that I had a satellite phone at the cabin, a small iridium unit that Henrik had bought me in 2019 after I had spent a week alone at the island during a bad fall storm and had been unreachable, and that I called Henrik at 6:58 a.m. and that the call went through. Henrik said, "Astrid, stay there. Do not try to come back to Duluth. The roads are already a problem. I am going to lock the house. I am going to walk over to the Andersons. They have been organizing the block since yesterday because of what they were seeing on the news. I'm going to be safe." I said, "Henrik, the kids." He said, "Britta is at home with David and Linnea. They are going to be safe in Minneapolis. David's whole condo building has been organizing for 2 days. Matt's called me at 5:30. He is at his cabin in Bemidji. He is going to stay there. I have spoken to all 3 of them this morning. Astrid, listen to me. They're going to be safe. You need to stay at the island. The island is the safest place any of us have. Do you understand?" I said, "I understand." "Henrik, I love you," he said. "I love you, Astrid. I love you so much. I will find a way to call you again." The call ended at 7:03 a.m. The iridium phone died on the 7th of November when its battery, which I had not been able to charge consistently, finally drained below the threshold for transmission. I have not, in the 183 days since, used it. I have, however, in the months that followed, made contact again. I will tell you about that. I want to compress because the daily texture of nearly 7 months alone on a small Minnesota island is its own slow, careful story. I rationed the food I had brought from Duluth. The food, plus the substantial pre-stocked supplies that Henrik and I had been keeping at the cabin for years for reasons of small, careful preparedness, gave me approximately 8 months of food at one person's careful ration. I supplemented with fishing. Black Spruce Lake holds a substantial population of walleye, northern pike, smallmouth bass, and lake trout, and I had been a competent angler since my Iron Range childhood. I caught, between October and ice up, approximately 90 pounds of fish, which I cleaned and froze in the cabin's small generator-run freezer in November. I caught, after ice up, approximately 40 more pounds through small, careful holes I cut in the ice with my father's old hand auger. I have, today, approximately 3 months of food remaining at one person's careful ration, plus a freezer of fish that should last another 2 months in the small, careful chest freezer the cabin's solar setup runs. I drew water from the lake through the hand pump and the sand filter, plus the rainwater catchment. The system has held flawlessly through 6 months and 1 full winter of careful use. I heated the cabin with the wood stove and the fireplace. I had, on the morning of the 21st of October, 2 cords of split firewood. I cut and split 2 more cords on careful work days through the autumn, bucking, standing dead aspen, and birch on the island itself, which had a small but adequate supply for emergency use. I made it through the winter with about 1/3 of a cord remaining at ice out. I painted. I had brought on this trip every painting supply I had been planning to use for the 6-week residency. I have, in 7 months, completed approximately 90 paintings, substantially more than I have ever completed in a comparable period of my 40-year painting practice. The paintings are, by my own quiet judgment, the best work I have ever done. They are the small, slow, careful documentation of a single, small, 2-acre island in a single, small, spring-fed lake in northern Minnesota during a single autumn, winter, and early spring, with the small, careful changes of light and vegetation and weather that those seasons produced. I have been, in 7 months, the most productive working artist I have ever been. I want to tell you about the winter, because the winter is the thing that nearly broke me, and because the winter is the thing that I had not, in any version of my survival planning, been adequately prepared for. The lake froze on the 18th of November. I had been preparing, through the first 3 weeks of the month, for what the freeze would mean. The water moat that had been keeping the island invisible was about to disappear. The island was about to become, by every functional measure, accessible on foot from any direction. I had spent the early part of November preparing in 3 specific ways. First, I had banked the cabin in deep snow and brush, in the small, careful way that traditional northern cabin people had been doing for 2 centuries. I had cut substantial quantities of low conifer brush from the island's dense black spruce thickets, and I had piled it around the cabin's foundation and against the south-facing porch in a way that, by the time the first snowfall covered the brush, made the cabin almost invisible from any approach across the lake. By mid-December, the cabin had been, from any distance over 100 yards, indistinguishable from a small, dense thicket of snow-covered conifers. Second, I had set up a small, careful early warning system. I had run a length of fishing line in a small perimeter around the island, about 30 yards out from the cabin, with a series of small bells attached. The bells were too small to be heard from the cabin in normal weather, but they would, in the substantial silence of a frozen Minnesota lake, be audible if anything heavy enough to break the lines disturbed them. I had checked and reset the lines 3 times a week through the winter. Third, I had committed to silence. From the moment of ice up to the moment of ice out, I had kept the cabin's lighting to a single, careful candle in the room I was working in. I had restricted my outdoor activity to the small fenced area immediately around the cabin and the woodshed. I had not used the wood stove during daylight hours after the 2nd week of December. I had switched to using only the fireplace. In the windowless interior bedroom I had converted to my main living space, where the small chimney was concealed by the dense, overhanging branches of a black spruce. I had not, between mid-December and mid-March, lit a single light or made a single sound that could have been observed from beyond the immediate cabin clearing. The winter held. 3 figures walked across the frozen lake on the morning of the 8th of February. I observed them through the small, careful slit I had cut in the southern wall of the bedroom, from a distance of about a 1/4 mile. They walked slowly. They were clearly not alive in the way the living are alive. They walked in a small, ragged line, headed south. They did not look toward the island. They passed within about 150 yards of the south end of Halvor's Island on the open ice. They continued south into the small set of bays at the south end of the lake and disappeared. I did not, after that morning, make a sound for 3 weeks. I made it through the winter. I made my first radio contact on the morning of the 23rd of November. I had brought, in my packing on the 28th of September, a small portable shortwave radio that Henrik had bought me in 2018, and that I had been using at the cabin for the last 7 years to listen to BBC broadcasts in the evenings. The radio picked up, on the morning of the 23rd, day 33, a small daily check-in being run by a man named Hartley Sjöström, who was 70 years old, who had been a middle school principal in Ely, Minnesota, before his retirement in 2018, and who had been holding together, since the 3rd week of October, a small, careful network of about 18 operators across the Iron Range and the northeastern part of Minnesota. I joined Hartley's network on the 2nd day after I found him. Through Hartley's network, I confirmed in early December that Henrik was alive at the small, fortified neighborhood block on Park Point in Duluth that he had walked over to on the morning of the 21st. The block had been organizing since the day before the outbreak because the small set of Anderson neighbors had been watching the international news closely and had decided to start small, careful preparations on the 20th. Henrik has been at Park Point ever since. I confirmed in mid-December that our daughter Britta Linda Erickson, 33, a middle school teacher in Minneapolis, was alive at her husband David's condo building near the University of Minnesota campus with our 2-year-old granddaughter Linnea. The building had been substantially fortified in early November. I confirmed in mid-January that our son, Mats Lind, 30, a Forest Service trail crew leader who had been at his small cabin 12 miles west of Bemidji on the morning of the outbreak, was alive at a small, fortified rural community at Lake Bemidji State Park. All 4 of them are, today, alive and well. I have spoken with Henrik, by careful relayed message through Hartley's network, every Tuesday and every Friday since the 2nd week of December. I am leaving the island in 23 days, on the morning of the 30th of May. I am going to row the canoe across the small, 250 yards of open water to the Mainland Forest Service campground at the western shore of the lake. I am going to walk a small, unpaved Forest Service road 3 miles east to State Highway 1. I am going to be met at the small abandoned Tower Sudan State Park gate at the intersection by a small organized escort party from a consolidating survivor community that Hartley's network has identified at Tower Sudan, 12 miles south of the lake. I am going to spend the early summer at Tower Sudan, doing the small, careful work of integrating into the small, consolidating community there. I am going to walk south with a careful, organized group in late July to a larger consolidating community at the small village of Cotton, 50 miles north of Duluth. From Cotton, by the small organized travel patterns that the regional networks have been working out for 2 months, I am going to make a final escorted trip to Park Point, Duluth in mid-August. Henrik and I are going to embrace, by the careful planning of 2 people who have not seen each other in almost 10 months, on a small grass strip at the intersection of Park Point Drive and Lake Avenue in Duluth, sometime in the afternoon of the 17th of August. I am preparing. If you are reading this, if you have, by some long, unspecified chain of events, driven the small Forest Service road that branches off State Highway 1 a quarter-mile east of the small village of Embarrass in northeastern Minnesota, and have come down the short, steep grade to the small Forest Service campground on the west shore of Black Spruce Lake, and have looked east across approximately a quarter-mile of open water in summer, or flat, snow-covered ice in winter, to a small 2-acre island with a small concealed log cabin among the dense black spruce and white pine. I want you to know 2 things. The first is that the cabin is here and is yours if you can get to it. The small concealed key to the cabin door is in a small steel box mounted under the 3rd joist of the boathouse from the eastern wall, about 2 feet up from the floor. The boathouse itself is unlocked. There is, at the boathouse, a small aluminum boat with a 9.9 horsepower outboard, plus a hand-built wooden canoe. The fuel for the outboard is in a small 5-gallon can in the boathouse, sufficient for several lake crossings. If the lake is frozen, walk across. But only if the ice has been frozen for at least 4 weeks and is at least 8 inches thick. Test the ice at intervals as you cross. The cabin has, by my count this morning, approximately 3 months of food remaining at one person's careful ration, plus the substantial freezer of fish, plus the small set of fishing equipment that will let any competent person continue the fishing program. The wood stove draws cleanly. The hand pump draws clean, filtered lake water. The rainwater catchment works. The small library is on the shelves. The radio frequency for Hartley Sjöström's network is written on a small index card I'm leaving on the kitchen table. If you join the network and tell Hartley that Astrid Lynn sent you, he will know what to do. The second is that the substantial number of small private islands on the small inland lakes of the upper Midwest, the Northeast, and the Pacific Northwest are, in the world that has come, one of the largest unrecognized inventories of naturally defensible space in the country. Minnesota alone has approximately 10,000 named lakes. The Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness has, by careful inventory, approximately 1,000 individual islands in its lake systems. Northern Wisconsin and northern Michigan together hold thousands more. The Adirondacks and the lakes of New England and the Maritimes hold thousands. British Columbia holds tens of thousands. Many of these islands are, by the careful records of the various states' tax authorities, in private ownership, often by families who have held them for 3 or 4 generations. Many of those families have, in 2025, no surviving members close enough to use them, or have lost touch with the islands through generational drift. The cabins on those islands are, in many cases, sitting empty. If you are within reach of one, find it. The county auditor's office in any northern county will have records of private island holdings. The cabins are usually accessible if you can find the boathouse. The keys are usually findable by a thoughtful searcher in the small, careful places that island owners hide them. Use the islands. They are, by every measure of summer and shoulder season survival, among the most defensible small spaces a person can occupy. But know what winter does to them. Plan for it. The morning is bright. The ice on Black Spruce Lake went out on the 12th of April, which was right on the historical average. The small, careful migration of common loons that nests on this lake every summer arrived on the 20th, and the male of the resident pair has been calling at dawn for 14 consecutive mornings. The first painted turtles came up onto the small, flat granite outcrop at the southwest corner of the island 3 days ago. The first wild leeks I have been harvesting from the small clearing behind the cabin came up last week. The walleye, by my own careful fishing of the last 3 days, have moved into their late spring shallows. I am going to put down the small leather-bound notebook I have been writing this in. I am going to walk out to the small flat granite at the southwest corner of the island that I have been calling, in my own private nomenclature, Halvor's Stone. A small flat slab where my great-grandfather used to sit and smoke his pipe in the evenings during the years he lived in the cabin in his retirement, between 1928 and his death in 1947. I am going to sit on the stone and drink the small cup of black coffee I am rationing carefully, and I am going to watch the small, steady morning light come up across 250 yards of clean, cold, spring-fed water. In 23 days, I am going to row the canoe across that water for the last time before the summer. In 200 days, I am, by every quiet, careful conversation I have been having with Henrik on the radio, going to be back at the island with my husband. The island will be here. The island has been here for a very long time. The island will, by the small, steady patience of granite and water, and the small, careful traditions of the families who have used it, continue to be here. That is, by every measure that matters, enough. Astrid Lane Halvor's Island, Black Spruce Lake, St. Louis County, Minnesota, 7 May, 2026.